2, it's the approval of the September meeting summary. Do I have a motion for approval?
So moved.
Thank you. Second? Thank you. Any questions, comments, suggestions? If not, all those in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? All right, motion passes. Thank you all. Item 3 is update on our RMAP, the long range plan, and Hannah's going to give us a brief update so you all know. As I mentioned at the last meeting, we'll have this as a standing item at every meeting so you all are aware of what your staff are up to. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, committee members. My name is Hannah Oden. I'm a planning coordinator at PAG. And today I'm just going to provide an update on the 2055 RMAP, or Regional Mobility and Accessibility Plan, which is currently being developed. It covers regional transportation investments in our region over a 30-year period. And just for an orientation reminder, the RMAP is our federally required long-range plan that is updated every 4 years. And the most recent RMAP, which was an update to the 2016 RMAP, was approved by Regional Council in September of 2020. The RMAP must satisfy the federal requirements for long-range transportation planning, and this includes reasonable assumptions on future growth, development, and associated traffic projections. The plan also strives to ensure that our investments are responsive to the future growth and needs of our region. The fiscal constraint is a key component of the long-range plan. Early projections show that the anticipated fiscal constraint for the 2055 RMAP is approximately $16.2 billion. This will be refined as we move forward with the plan development process. Just as a reminder, projects that are programmed through the TIP must also be in the long-range plan. The RMAP is required to be a performance-based plan, which is a federal requirement. So this tracks elements such as safety, multimodal choices, bridge pavement condition, and also environmental stewardship. We continue to track performance measures and associated targets since 2016. So as part of the plan development process, we are currently evaluating these performance measures and targets, and this includes the federally required performance measures, as well as those that are specific to the RMAP. A TPC working group will be formed to review and refine these performance measures for the RMAP in coordination with PAG staff. Another critical component of the RMAP is the project list. And we have an RMAP Project Explorer, which is an online tool which houses data and project details, which includes cost, scope, location, and performance data. So the RMAP Project Explorer opened in July for jurisdictional partners to submit projects, and we have almost all those in. Those projects have been updated in the portal. There's also the RTA Next Explorer, which allows for easy transfer of project data between those two plans. The RTA Next projects can be imported into the RMAP Project Explorer. It's a quick, efficient, and thorough way to access information. And as staff, we've been working with jurisdictional leads to move most of those RTA Next projects over to the RMAP Project Explorer, so those are reflected in that plan. We are currently working with jurisdictional partners to make any remaining updates to the Project Explorer for projects to be considered in the RMAP, and to ensure that those are accurately reflected. And we also are in the process of pulling in performance data for the new projects that are submitted, so that will be reflected in the Project Explorer soon. We discussed the project list with TPC members last month. With the new projects added, the total cost of in-plan projects do exceed the anticipated fiscal constraint of $16.2 billion. As of right now, we have 423 new and in-plan projects that are in the Explorer. So we understand that this project list will evolve as we continue working with TPC members to refine that list. We asked them to think about what projects could possibly be removed or moved to the reserve project list to again refine that list to get it closer to meeting the fiscal constraint. A TPC working group will also be formed to refine and create a final project list that meets the fiscal constraint of the 2055 RMAP. And lastly, there is coordination with the RTA Next effort. The approved plan and projects to be considered by voters in May of 2025 as part of RTA Next will be reflected in the RMAP. The project cost estimates for RTA projects reflected in the RMAP will be revised once approved by the RTA board, and the RMAP and RTA Next public outreach efforts will be coordinated. All right, that concludes my update. I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Hannah. Any questions? Yes, Carmen.
Just, how much over is the cost estimate than the $16 billion fiscal constraint?
Yeah, so the total cost now for new and in-plan projects is approximately 28 billion. So I think that's about 12 billion over.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions for Hannah? If not, thank you so much, Hannah. Appreciate it. All right, moving on to the next item. This is an update on the development of the TIP, and Jamie's going to give us that update. Thank you, Jamie.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the Management Committee. I'm pleased to be with you today to provide an update on the TIP development process. This is a process that began over a year ago in August of 2022. During that since that time, we've come to various committees, including the Regional Council, Management Committee, TPC, TIP Subcommittee, the Transit Working Group, to provide updates, to take action, or to have working discussions for programming. So this, as you know, is the currently approved TIP, the FY22 through 2026 TIP. It's a federally required 5-year prioritized listing projects for funding in our region. And the critical component of the TIP is the project list. Project list includes for each fiscal year, the fund source, the amount, and the phase for each project. So since it's been several months that we've provided an update to the Management Committee, I wanted to talk about some of the key points that we were sharing with committees over the past year, because this is a unique TIP development cycle. This is the first TIP that includes program years beyond the sunset of the current RTA plan. It's something we've been sharing since the beginning of the process. In the previous TIP development cycles, programming of RTA roadway element projects was guided clearly by RTA board-approved IGAs or the RTA plan funding targets based on the RTA administrative code. Now that those RTA board-approved IGAs and administrative code targets have been met, supplemental funding on projects will be provided on a case-by-case basis as funding is identified. RTA funds will be programmed at the board's sole discretion through the RTA's budgeting process. There's also less flexibility to simply roll over funds or park funds on projects, regardless of whether or not they're being actively managed and moving to construction. And until a new TIP is adopted, we can continue to amend the current TIP as needed. So again, these are key points we've been sharing with committees to keep everyone up to speed with a consistent message. In March, the Regional Council had discussion about the status of the TIP development process and provided direction. And that direction was articulated in a memo that was shared with the Regional Council, as well as another memo that was sent to the TIP subcommittee. The memo describes the direction that was provided by the Regional Council and the fact that we have more time to complete the TIP development process. The federal requirement is to update the TIP at least once every 4 years. So the federal requirement for approval of a new TIP is May of 2025. In terms of next steps, the memo describes the first step being to identify projects that can be federalized so that the region's suballocation of federal STBG can be programmed in the outer fiscal years 27 and 28, followed by programming of state HERF 12-6 funds on projects in those fiscal years. Finally, moving forward to address funding needs in RTA roadway element projects, the RTA board will program supplemental RTA excise or sales tax dollars on projects that are construction ready on a pay-as-you-go basis. Again, these are some of the steps that were articulated in the memo from March. So since that time, there's been a lot of activity, and just to highlight several items. In the late spring, we did distribute an email to member agencies requesting that our member agencies identify candidate projects to federalize, that is to program the federal STBG dollars on. We did receive one response from Pima County for the First Avenue project. We also held meetings with ADOT to discuss forecasted changes to federal funding. Because of the Census 2020, there has been some rebalancing of funds across the state, and that's resulting in the PAG region getting less federal dollars in the urban area population band, or the greater than 200,000 population band. In coordination with our member agencies, we also conducted the fiscal year rollovers from 2023 to 2024 for HERF 12-6, RTA, and local funds. We also updated the worksheet that we were using last spring with the TIP subcommittee and the TPC to program dollars on RTA roadway element projects. And we've held 2 TIP subcommittee meetings this fall to discuss the updated revenue forecasts, as well as programming of SDBG and HERF on RTA roadway element projects. It's important to provide a reminder about priorities for RTA statutory compliance. With just 2.5 years left before the 2006 voter-approved RTA excise revenue collections conclude, it is the statutory duty of the RTA to ensure that any remaining projects which have not yet initiated project phase commence construction of a phase before July 1st, 2026. Projects that have either initiated a phase or completed previous phases may proceed with the remaining phase or phases beyond FY 2026, utilizing any regional funds available. As we review and update the funding priorities for fiscal years 24 through 26, the following projects that are consistent with the voter-approved plan therefore take precedence. You can see that listing on your screen includes the Barraza Aviation Parkway Extension Project, Valencia Road I-19 to Alvernon, Valencia Road Kolb Road to Houghton Road, 22nd Street Camino Seco to Houghton Road, and Harrison Road, Irvington Road to Golf Links. Also, as a reminder about deferred projects and local funding commitments, RTA deferred projects are scope change projects and require voter approval as previously determined by the RTA board. And this is my final slide. I want to thank you all for your time this morning. So in terms of additional updates and next steps, the biggest change is that we're adjusting the fiscal years to now include fiscal year 2029. So in the spring and summer, we're keeping our options open to potentially bring forward the TIP approval sooner, but May of 2024 is looking more realistic. And as you all know, by the end of May of 2024, fiscal year 2024 will almost be over. So it's preferable to cover the 5-year period of fiscal years 25 through 2029. So for fiscal year 2024 through 2026 recommendations, those will be processed as TIP amendments. Fiscal year 20, these are for the roadway element projects. For FY 2027 through FY 2029, recommendations will be included in the draft TIP project list to be adopted during the TIP cycle. In terms of next steps, we're going to finalize the draft TIP project lists. We're going to commence our technical analysis that we do in-house, including the travel demand modeling, the GIS mapping, Title VI analysis, etc. We're going to then complete the draft TIP and initiate the public involvement process, including open houses and the 30-day public comment period, as well as a public hearing. And then we anticipate requesting final approval in May. And with that, I want to conclude my remarks and say thank you for your time today, but also thank you to members of your staff for all of their time during this process, including the last 2 TIP subcommittee meetings, which have been very productive. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Jamie. Any questions?
I do have a question. Can you go back 3 slides now, please?
Happy to. 3 slides, is it?
Can you explain that second paragraph in more detail, please?
So the second paragraph, projects that have initiated a phase, that one?
Yep.
Or completed previous phases may proceed with the remaining phases beyond FY 2026, utilizing any regional funds available. So according to statute, we must complete a construction phase of a project prior to the completion of the current RTA plan. So that's the process. Mr. Mokimi, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I'm not sure what specifically you're looking for, but in a nutshell, the concept is that if you start a phase of the project prior to July of 26, you have met the schedule by the RTA plan's definition. If you go beyond July 2026 for any construction, that is still in compliant with the statute. So I think the intent in this paragraph is that you can have a project in construction in 27, 28, 29, and you've already met the intent of the statute because you had previously initiated the phase of that project.
And how are you incorporating that cash flow that would be necessary for those projects?
So again, we're, as Jamie mentioned, we're looking at fiscal year 27, 28, and 29, and all of that plays into the cash flow discussion. So if projects are ready for construction, then we can go ahead and budget for those projects. If they're not, they're going to benefit from revenues in 27, 28, and 29.
My question is more specific to the long-term plan for delivery of RTA one.
Yep.
Right, and where you say utilizing any regional funds available.
Yep.
Does that mean all regional funds available? with
Yep,
regard
that
to
was-
this project?
That was the direction we had from the board, and that's what
Which board? The RTA board or the? PAG?
well, technically both regional council and, when they delayed the tip development, we had both regional council and RTA board approve working through the tip committee to develop balance of the remaining projects utilizing federal funds and state funds in 27, 28, and 29. And that's what the committee is doing. They're looking at all funds for the 5-year plan.
So the intent here is for us, shelve for a minute RTA next. The completion of RTA one or the 2006 RTA would be, if RTA next does not get passed, to accomplish that with all the regional funds that could.
Within this updated 5-year plan, the revenues demonstrate so far that that is doable.
All the regional funds that come to the,
Federal, HERF, yes.
to complete RTA one.
Yes.
And your expectation would be, at what point would RTA one be complete?
Currently, the way they're planning it out, we'll have a few final phases of projects potentially in construction in 27, 28, and 29 as well.
Or by 20?
That's the projection at this point.
Thank you.
So add on to that then, so if RTA Next is not approved, then not only these 5 projects, but the third projects that have to rely on those regional funds. Timing wise, I just want to make sure, so. Does that have to be started prior to 2026? Or is it considered the previous phases that the city constructed?
Yeah, so those are
Enablement.
unique. Yeah, so there are 3 projects out of the 4. 3 of them are final phases. So those have already met and they comply with the statute.
So does that final phase have to begin prior to 2026 or by 2026 to be over?
So those phases don't.
All right.
Phases don't.
But 3 of the 4.
3 of the 4, and the 4th one is the Pima County First Avenue project, which currently is anticipated to be fully funded with federal dollars.
By when?
They're still working on it. I believe it's in 26, 27. So they will start construction within that time frame.
The 26, 27 is after 26.
Fiscal year 26.
Understand?
As soon as they start construction prior to calendar year July 1, they meet and they're in compliance.
So I think on First Avenue, it'd be great for us to sit with the team, and I'm sure
Yeah.
our transportation team has, just so that I'm participating in an overview conversation. We're in that space where we have recommended building it as a 3-lane cross section. RTA plan has it as 4. So that's in the space on the last bullet, right, that says scope change projects require voter approval. So we're straddling 2 lines here. And if RTA Next is not approved and we have to build 4 lanes, my concern is the ability to have that designed and under construction, the timeframes necessary to secure future regional funds to do that.
Yep. No, I understand. And so that's one of the projects that potentially would be in this overlap situation. So those have to be addressed and included in the plan as what if, right? If RTA passes, what happens? If RTA Next doesn't happen, what happens? So those what if scenarios have to be addressed in the tip top.
And unfortunately, it's a big what if. We can't even get moving on the design.
I know. So that's the challenge everybody's facing. Again, I want to thank Jamie and his team and all your staff. They are looking at it and they're asking the right questions. So give them your support and let them keep looking at it, because that's the only way we can get to a solution.
Just so we're clear, my interest was not on those projects. It was on the entire program. So
Yeah.
that's why I was asking.
Yeah. So the overlap issue is something that they're looking at, and it needs to be addressed in the tip somehow. All right, any other questions for Jamie? If not, thank you all. Appreciate it. Thank you, Jamie.
Thank you.
Next item, somewhat related, obviously, is our update on the revenue projections, and James is going to give that update.
Morning. Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Before I begin, I would like to thank David Zinda, our Economic and Financial Planning Manager, for the detailed work making this report possible. We've made some changes to the regional revenues report, most notably moving information from the memo into the actual report. By request, we began incorporating information into the attached report across several other funding sources. So this is no longer simply a HERF report. This report looks specifically at roadway funding. Usually this involves what PAG directly administers: STBG, HERF 12.6, HERF 2.6, and RTA. However, we do also show HERF revenues of our member jurisdictions who receive HERF. We feel that this is important information to consider from a regional standpoint. It helps to provide a complete funding picture. It also helps account for figures that were in the older report and continue to be included in this report. For example, Table 3 shows total HERF received across the region, including HERF 12.6, 2.6, and direct HERF, and even VLT collected by PAG member jurisdictions. Previously, we showed the 12.6 and 2.6 in detail. Now we will be able to see the other half of the story as well. So now I'll walk you through these tables and figures. Table 1 used to be in the item memo. This shows a summary of everything PAG has received on our accounts year to date. We see HERF 12.6, 2.6, RTA revenue, and STBG greater than 200,000 population. We used to show federal obligation authority, and now we show STBG greater than 200,000 population. Because we are really interested in roadway funding for this report, we're focusing on the kind of funding that can be used to that end. If you recall, all remaining RTA roadway projects are in the greater than 200,000 population urban area. Table 2 shows what was adopted in the last tip. We included this old table from the item memo. You'll notice that in this case, we show projected federal obligation authority, which tried to capture STBG available. However, it did not distinguish between population bands, and we will do so in the future as we did in Table 1. Turning to Table 3 and Figure 1, we see something that we are already familiar with. As of September 2023, there was just shy of $45 million in HERF and BLT collected across the region. Of that, nearly $45 million, PAG collected about $9.2 million, or about 20% of that regional funding. The remainder was distributed directly to Pima County, cities of Tucson and South Tucson, and the towns of Marana, Oro Valley, and Sahuarita. Regional HERF revenues were almost 5.5% higher year over year. Over the 5-year average, we stand at about 9.5%. Table 4 is also familiar and shows HERF 12.6 in detail. So far, we have $7.5 million in the books, which is about 11.4% higher or more than implied by the ADOT official forecast, and about 9% stronger than last year. The FY 2024 projected column is no longer a flat line estimate, where the official annual estimate is divided equally across months. Now PAG staff uses the variation in past distribution to imply future monthly distribution. If the future resembles the past, then this approach to monthly estimates should capture seasonality in the data. For example, we might expect higher HERF in the summer when people fill up their gas tanks and travel. Table 5 is Table 4, but just for HERF 2.6. The story is similar to HERF 12.6, stronger than expected collectives, totaling about $1.6 million year to date. Table 6, currently PAG has just over $77 million in an interest-bearing account. A large portion of the money is already programmed on projects. And Table 7 and 8 are both new. In Table 7, we look at the city and town HERF distributions year to date. In the final column, we see city-town total. We have this data going back to about 2003, so we included a wealth of ratios below the total. Depending on the jurisdiction, there's definitely some variation in trend over time. I believe that city and town HERF distributions are related to the amount of fuel sold in those jurisdictions. Table 8 shows the HERF 12.6 and 2.6 we've already seen. Additionally, we have Pima County HERF and Pima County vehicle license tax. the portion set aside for transportation use only. The final column sums this data in table 7, or I'm sorry, table 8, as well as table 7. So this is the regional total and should match table 3. Table 9 shows the last 5 years and lets you see how much HERF your city and town received. Sometimes these numbers change depending on corrections that are made from ADOT. Although we make every effort to update changes when we see them in the reports, there may be some very small deviations from what your finance staff may report. And table 10 shows gallons of gas filled in Pima County through various fiscal years. We normally like to see about 13%. Table 11 is not quite new. It was brought in from the item memo and shows RTA budget and actuals. We did reformat a bit to make the table consistent with others in this report. Note that the FY24 adopted budget month-by-month figures are generated the same way as the HERF, weighting according to last year's actual seasonality. Currently, we see about 40.5 million collected in TPT this year, trending for more than 5% gain over the adopted budget. That also mimics the percent rise over last year's actuals, just under 5%. To share that concludes my update. Happy to take questions.
All right, thank you. Any questions for James? Seeing none, thank you, James, appreciate it. Moving on to the next item, which is a tip amendment, and this is actually tied back to the most recent tip subcommittee meeting, and Carolyn's going to give you an update. This is an action item, and ADOT has requested for this update to make sure that they can keep their project on schedule. So Carolyn, go ahead and please give us the update.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. This morning we'll be reviewing a tip amendment as requested by the Arizona Department of Transportation. PAG, as a regional designated metropolitan planning organization, is responsible for maintaining the Transportation Improvement Program, or TIP, including processing amendments for the FY22 to FY26 TIP. This task includes the programming of Arizona State Department of Transportation funds that are spent on regional projects. These funds are primarily federal funds that are referenced in the TIP as ASTBG, with funding allocations amounts determined through the ADOT Resource Allocation Advisory Committee, also known as RAC. With this amendment, ADOT has requested that we move the full program funding of F4 I-10 Country Club Road and Keno intersection tip number 9.23 in the FY22 to 26 tip, which is necessary for the project to proceed with the next stages of implementation. To fully fund this project, ADOT is requesting that we rebalance their construction program. We understand that this project has now in the realm of $500 million, and so the rebalancing of the funding will allow it to proceed. And with that, I'd like to ask Mr. Rod Lane to provide any further information or questions that the committee may have. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Rod, anything you'd like to add?
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. This is really a confluence of about 3 challenges. One of them you've already discussed. First one being the significant price increase for this project. It was originally thought it would go at about $300 million. It's now up to $500 million, and that's a pretty good number. We're pretty confident in that number. That's through our cost risk analysis that we came up with that. The other issue is that the current TIP basically only goes for 3 years. Through 24, 25, 26, and the project, this design build
We're all ready. Good morning. We'll get the meeting of the RTA Next Working Group in order. Thank you all for being here. Again, appreciate the opportunity to have an ongoing dialogue on development of the RTA Next plan. As you all recall, the working group consists of the 9 jurisdictional members as well as representatives from the CAC. So this morning, we also have Brian Keeley from CAC with us, Tom, Carolyn, and Jamie online. And with that, I'd like to go ahead and just dive right in. We got a lot to discuss. And so item 2, very broad, and it's broad on purpose so we can discuss hopefully various proposals and various opportunities to try to hopefully accomplish this task by next month. So if you all recall, our TA board's direction was to present a draft RTA Next plan to the board on December 7th. So appreciate everybody's involvement to date, and we do have a lot to work on. So just want to thank everybody for your involvement. So I won't get too much into what happened at the CAC because basically everything that happened at the CAC was what happened previously at this working group. So Tom McGovern, the chair of the CAC, gave a really good overview of what this group was talking about at the previous meeting, discussed obviously those projects that you all provided feedback on that they need to be reconsidered. And as part of that discussion, because Brian was at the previous meeting as well, Brian proposed a couple different scenarios, and we had that discussion at the CAC. And in addition to that, Sam followed up with additional clarifications. And so you have all that information. We can discuss that as well. And then in your packet, we provided additional clarifications based on the questions that came up. So there's a lot of materials in your packet on the table side. But if that's okay with everyone, I want to dive in and start with where we left off with Brian's proposal at the CAC meeting. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Brian.
Thank you, sir. Again, last TMC meeting, there was a lot of input. I believe looking at the rankings that the CAC provided stirred a lot of conversation here. And what my takeaway from that personally as a member was that a lot of items that the CAC put below the line, the TMC ad hoc believed should go back up above the line. Also took into consideration the city of Tucson's proposal or their holistic approach to how they see the update moving forward, and heard how important transit was, especially to the city of Tucson. So I took an approach, and yes, thank you. We'll hand it. I don't know if it's going to be online as well. I'll kind of describe through as we go through this. I basically created 4 plans, and my approach to it was this. I took every jurisdiction's #1 priority and I listed it. And then their #2s and their #3s. After 3, the only jurisdictions left with priorities was Pima County and City of Tucson. And I basically just ranked them down in that order. And then I took the line. I said, where's $1.12 billion? And drew a hard line. And so as this goes around in option 1, that's all this does. It basically says that everybody gets their top 6 roadway projects. And after that, actually, it falls off. City of Tucson was the only one with remaining projects because City of Tucson had 15 ranked projects. So option 1 was nothing more than finding the balanced budget was the only real take and approach to it. Knowing that transit is important not only to the City of Tucson, but to several members of the CAC, high capacity transit in particular, was listed at $70 million. So I continued on with the project to try to find a way to fund that $70 million. So all option 2 does is move the line up 1. So Pima County loses its #6 project and Tucson loses its #6 project. That created a surplus of just shy of 58 million, which meant the high capacity transit was still $12 million under budget. In option 3, I did something a little bit different. Pima County and Tucson projects number 6 came back up above the line. Arbitrarily moved Tucson's number 5 below the line, so now we're a little out of order. But Tucson's number 5 is more expensive than their number 6, so this was nothing more than a numbers game. When you look at that, high capacity transit is now fully funded at $70 million, and there's still a surplus of $1.2 million remaining. So option 3, fully funded high capacity transit from the roadway projects and left a surplus. Getting some additional feedback from members of the CAC committee, there was a desire to put even more towards transit. So we came up with a option 4, again, which moves the line. Once you do that, Pima County's number 6 comes off. But what that ends up doing is high capacity transit is fully funded, and there is still a surplus of 50 million, almost 51 million left over that the CAC would like to use to increase the transit budget. So if that were the case, transit would be fully funded or transit would have, was it $560 million plus an additional $70 million for high capacity transit. As far as named roadway projects, Tucson would still have 6. Pima County and Tucson would have a shared project. That's the Vail project or Vail area project. Pima County would have 4. Marana would have 3. Oro Valley and Cerrito both have 2. Pascua, South Tucson would have 1. There's ADOT has 1 standalone project. That's the Sonoran corridor. So that would be there. So that was the approach and what was presented at the CAC. We did not vote on it, but we did have discussion on it. And I feel like it was fairly productive and positive discussion. But this was nothing more than an exercise, taking back the feedback that we'd heard, knowing very well that this is not perfect, that there is not a perfect plan out there, but trying to take this from a regional approach and frankly capture as many different jurisdictions and voting groups as possible while still honoring the priorities, at least as I've heard them from each of the jurisdictions. So that was a very quick and broad overview, but an attempt to bring it here for discussion as well. So, sir, I'll leave.
Yeah, thank you, Brian. Appreciate it. Yeah, as Brian mentioned, we had that conversation at the CAC meeting, and it appeared to be somewhat kind of a path forward. So there was some level of interest in having that conversation today, and that's why we brought it to you today. So you all have the same information. I assume at the next CAC meeting, we're going to dive into it even deeper. But any feedback from this group would help the CAC with that conversation as well. So again, thank you, Brian. And we're hoping if anybody has any feedback on Brian's proposal, we can have that discussion before we move on. Any questions, comments for Brian?
I do.
Yes.
Mr.
Right, there's somebody.
Why don't you go ahead, Shane, and then Rod, you're next.
Thank you.
Just quick glance, Brian, I appreciate the CAC's, Carolyn, I really appreciate the CAC's willingness to, it seems like it's taking the previous work of the ad hoc committee, that you know, the TMC had an approved plan, but it takes those projects and it looks like it's so it's building off of the work that's been done over the last, you know, year and a half or so. And I really appreciate that. I think that's the only way to really continue progress. And so thank you for that. It looks like a good place to have discussion.
Thank you. All right, Rod.
Thank you. Yeah, my thought is the last. I attended the CAC meeting as well and heard the discussion. Is there any way that you guys can email me a copy of this or scan me a copy of this? I saw it being distributed out there, but I'm only looking at it at the screen, and I'd like to look at it in a little more depth.
Yep, be happy to. And yeah, I recognize it's hard to see on the screen, but we'll get it to you shortly.
Thank you.
Send it out to everybody.
Sure. Yeah. So typically we do it right after the meeting, but we'll do it during the meeting.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you.
All right. Any other questions or comments? Let's, Carolyn.
Yes, Brian, could you explain for everybody at what level the rest of the categoricals are funded in your proposal? Because this has your transit and the corridors. Did that change? Is that the TMC adopted framework, or is that the 626 proposal and discussion, which was fairly similar, but there was more in each of the safety and bike ped, et cetera, category, active transportation.
Actually, Tom, I'm gonna ask you to jump in and help me with that.
Sure.
Because the only approach I took on this was the last meeting of that line was 1.12 billion, and that was all I looked at. So
Just so everybody understands.
Yes.
Right? Okay. So the other categoricals are still at the TMC framework level.
yeah, this was attempt basically to come up with a balanced budget, while at the same time trying to creatively find a way to add funding, additional funding for transit, both high capacity transit as well as the transit line overall.
Thank you. And again, as a reminder, and somewhat related to your question, with updated cost estimates, there was $372 million of essentially being out of fiscally constrained. So the discussion we had in this group last time, as well as this exercise, and we checked the numbers, thank you for that, Brian, that addresses that additional cost increase as well.
These are
Updated cost
updated numbers.
estimates
What-
balanced
what
at
Brian-
1.1 billion, yes. So it addresses the 372 million over budget as well. Yes,
I wanted to mention that toward the end of that conversation, I wanted the CAC to understand what the implications would be of adopting the underlying framework from its June 26th motion. And so you can look at Brian's and get a good idea about that, but it essentially leaves 980 million for this segment, for this element, the corridor projects. So if you take Brian's and move up to wherever 980 comes in, you can see that depending on which of the options, but on option 4 it would multiple pages here. Like it would go up to what, just one line higher? 980. And remember, that's a framework that's considerably, well, it's similar in terms of the elements and categories as the TMC proposal, but it eliminates the contingency, and it also, as Brian noted, increases and as a result decreases the corridor projects. So bottom line is, from that initial proposal, it would be 980 million or so. That was the cutoff point in order to fund all of those the corridor projects, which that proposal was going to pose. So at 980, you would be up to the 976 number, right? So I pointed that out to the committee because it's important for them to understand that the proposal that they have is going to have an impact on these corridor projects, and to see whether that is something that they want to continue to discuss.
thank you. Rod, you have your hand up. Is that from before or?
That's from before. I will lower it.
Don't
Thank
worry.
you.
Thank you. All right, any other questions, comments? Again, this is the working group. I'd so love to hear more about if there's any other potential adjustments that need to be made before we go back to the CHC with any feedback on Brian's proposal. Go ahead.
Just to acknowledge a discussion that's been taking place at the CAC having to do with Colossal Cave Road and the size of the funding for that project. And so I noted at the CAC committee meeting on Monday that Kent County has heard that discussion. We're taking a look at Colossal Cave. We've also had conversations with a group of Green Valley residents. They were at the CAC committee meeting Monday, and they've been asking for consideration for improvements in the Green Valley area, which are currently not reflected in the plan. So they submitted a proposal or a presentation that includes a number of active transportation projects, bicycle, pedestrian improvements in the Green Valley area. So we're going to be meeting with that group. We're taking a look at Colossal Cave. And we'll come back with some feedback. The other thing that we want to confirm or reconfirm is the sponsor priority for the Pima County project. So as time marches on, we want to just make sure we're current on that. So we'll be coming back with some input for the discussion as things move forward. Colossal Cave, the issue there is that certain CAC committee members have expressed the belief that that project needs to be phased or separated out, and that it may be too ambitious to try and include all of those improvements in this particular plan. So just for information, we're taking a look at that, and we'll have some updated input back to.
Thank you. So again, the CAC is hoping to meet 2 weeks from now on Monday. Our hope is, and obviously I have to coordinate with officers, our hope is to hopefully reach some kind of a consensus at that meeting. Anything else anyone wants to provide to help that discussion move along? Any additional updates, any modifications to the scope, any modifications to cost estimates, all that information. I would request to have those to us as soon as possible so we can share that with the CAC prior to the packet going out next week on Monday. Yes.
All right, if I may. So I left prior to the end of the CAC committee meeting on Monday, and so there was an ask by Terry Rosema from Marina during the last ad hoc committee meeting that the CAC have a conversation about the dollar amounts that they're recommending for the different categorical elements, right? So they asked was that we look at shaping things on the corridor side in order to be able to fit within the overall budget. And he asked the same of the CAC committee. So I wasn't present for that conversation on Monday, and I'm curious if that occurred. And then related to that, Terry also at the last meeting of this group had indicated that Marana was removing or was okay with the removal of the Ina Road project, which in Brian's presentation, if we're talking about option 4, is included in there. So just
Yeah, be happy to touch on both of those. So the first part, no, there was no more discussion beyond the proposal at the time. So we hope to have that discussion at the next CAC meeting. As far as Ina goes, again, our protocol is that we need a formal request from the entity to modify or remove or change the scope. And I believe Eric is online, but I won't put him on the spot. But I believe they're still considering potential elements of the project that can remain similar to what the rest of you are all doing. So I would follow up with Eric and Terry to see if they like to do that. Eric, if you have your hand up, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. We continue to evaluate Ina. We do have some, what may have been mentioned, we do have some possible options that are still being evaluated. we'll look to return something more formally to the group here shortly.
Thank you. Again, that's our ongoing ask to all sponsors. If you look at any opportunities to make adjustments, let us know, but it really needs to be a formal submittal before we assume that they're okay with any adjustments. Any other questions? Tom, go ahead.
Yeah, I just following up on what Carmine had mentioned. I understand also from conversations with city that City of Tucson is also looking at what would work for them, and I'm presuming that at some point you two will compare notes and back about one of the things that was mentioned is Marianne Cleveland Way as a possible either substitute or rescoping of that project. So we want to kind of have the full picture, I think, when we next look at it.
And I think just to that point, we'll definitely get together with the city on that conversation, and that's a little bit of what comes first. So
Sure.
as we're looking at Colossal Cave, depending on where the line gets drawn, if this is a methodology that's going to be used right now, Marianne Cleveland isn't in there right, doesn't make the cut. And so in option number 4, Drexel Road of the county to get to the 980 falls off, but yet the city has Drexel Road projects. And so if we're going to be doing a corridor, we need to factor that in. So we'll get together with the city on that discussion related to Marianne Cleveland, Colossal Cave, and also Drexel.
I just want to make sure, Brian, that I understand the map. On option 1, projects that are either city, ADOT/city, and Pima County/city add up to about 352. Is that right? I do the math right?
I'm sorry, sir. So the ADOT,
So what I did is I took on the summary, you got Tucson at 224 million, ADOT/Tucson 50 million, and then Pima County/10. So what I did is I took half of the Pima County Tucson. That adds up to 352. Is that correct?
that sounds about right. I do the math, but yeah. And the Pima County,
I'm just making sure that, not the numbers, but just, was that the intent? So
that was the intent. And just because the ADOT/Tucson was broken out on the form, even though the project resides in the city of Tucson, I just listed them out as they were listed on the form. But yes, sir.
Fine, I
That's
just want
correct.
to make sure I understood what.
Yes, sir.
So the city of Tucson value, if you will, in the projects on that one is 352. I just did the math, and I took half of the Pima County Tucson. I took the full amount for ADOT. And then I just keep going down from there.
Correct.
And each of the options goes down to the last 250.
Yeah, and so obviously, as we get to option 4, the capital project for the city of Tucson reduces because we're losing projects each time we go to it. With the idea that that funding would come over to the transit side, which the idea there was hopefully that would largely benefit the city of Tucson, who is the biggest user of transit in the region.
So the basis for your analysis was basically taking all of the rank order 1s, all the rank order 2s.
Yeah, fully understanding that, as jurisdictions, you may decide that as you reprioritize, much to the point of Pima County, that if this project fell off, but it's part of the larger segment of Drexel, and if Pima County wanted to come in and say, this project's more important than our number 4 project, perhaps we want to swap those out. That's, I think, in the best interest of what each jurisdiction thinks. There was discussion at the CAC that we're kind of silencing our own voice here by just going rank order of hey, because you all said number 1's important, that number 1's the most important. At the same time, I put a lot of stock in what each of the jurisdictions have done to rank their projects. You know your jurisdictions better than I do, even though I was born and raised in Tucson, lived here for 45 years. There are some roads I do not travel as often as others. So I think your input is important, but as things change and rescope, if that changes, then that can certainly be put in here. So my input from the CAC is the biggest divide is between those who believe the named roadway projects are more important versus those who believe that transit's more important. That seems to be the divide that we find. The reality is they're both important. And the factor of importance pretty much depends on where you live and what you use. And so this was an attempt to try to find that compromise for the group and for the jurisdictions, and getting that feedback from jurisdictions to try to shift some of that around. So this truly is a draft. I mean, I'm certainly glad we did not vote on it at our meeting. It's still discussion, and because I think the feedback here is important.
Thank you for that. And again, you all hopefully had the same takeaway from the CAC meeting. There was some, I think, meeting of the minds, if I may characterize it that way. Yes, Jeff.
This is good work. I feel like you did listen, so I appreciate that. Had a couple questions. One under option 3, it says Oro Valley 3 projects, but under it's actually 2. I think it's just a typo. So from my understanding, then you ranked, you take the top 2, put them as named projects, took everything that used to be in the categories or the elements, and just added that to transit. Is that how that works? Because there's not really safety elements and modernization anymore.
This didn't cut the categoricals at all. It was just cutting named roadway projects.
Okay.
And the idea would be to reallocate that money over. So at first, honestly, all I was trying to do was fully fund high capacity transit, because there's been a lot of conversation about it. So it was cutting basically $70 million worth of roadway projects, the named projects to put it. And then there was that desire, like I said, to from some members of CAC to even go a little bit deeper, cutting roadway projects and adding that over to transit.
So the categories that we had like under safety down further, those are still there? Those monies are still there?
It's not in this.
Yeah, he didn't.
They're not in
Yeah,
this.
he didn't.
This is just the 33 projects or 3. Yeah.
And I didn't cut or add anything to the categoricals in this exercise. Those are another discussion.
Yeah, Mike, just clarify for everyone, the CAC has been discussing changes or reallocations, I should say, within the elements that would increase your framework by about $40 million, 42, I think, except for the transit, of course, which is 181 million. So total of 220 million. That 220 is made up by 2 main cuts, if you will. One is from the $100 million contingency application, which is part of the base your proposal, and they just trying to give a name to each of these is a little bit challenging sometimes. And then the remainder comes from about 130 million of cuts to the corridor projects. So 130 there and 40, and the math may not work out exactly, but that is what the difference would be, from 980 million up to 1.12 billion. And then there's another, as I said, 40 million in the other categoricals.
If I may just put some numbers to that, so it's roughly 200, I believe $243 million difference between the CAC sales tax increase proposal and the TMC framework. And then on top of that, you got the $372 million of cost increases. So we're looking at $600 million difference between the 2 proposals. What you provided today gets us closer to the 240 range.
One of the things that I've noticed in the materials, and maybe I just missed it, I don't see our cover memo on this.
Your packet is here to be handed out, and if you're ready to discuss it, we can hand it out and discuss it.
But how can these folks discuss it? We provided them the draft project list without so when you look at priorities, you're looking at simple numbers, you're not looking at qualitative analysis.
So at the last meeting, Sam handed out the spreadsheet and the packet went out on Wednesday. We didn't get your letter until Friday, so we can hand it out.
Something earlier, but that's fine.
Yeah.
I think for you all, there would be value in reading the narrative around this. Because to see a list like this, I think is incomplete. And that it doesn't give a story. I think that the conversation is important. I would suggest that you all take a look at that.
Yeah, we have it right there.
Before you all make decisions. What that looks like, because there was a lot of thought, a lot of discussion. It wasn't just put the apple cart. There was a lot of very deliberate discussion and conversation around that. But I think it's important.
But it's the same.
So and it's hard to have a conversation when you're given that at the 11th hour. So I would suggest that you incorporate that in your conversations and in your discussion. And I would also suggest to you requested that it be shared with the CIC as well, so they can see how we've taken comments from the CIC and incorporate that.
That was also handed out at the CAC meeting on Monday.
The narrative was.
Yep.
You saw the narrative?
Yep.
Good.
Thank you. All right, you got your hand up there. I thought I saw some movement. Any other questions, comments, suggestions? Again, thank you, Brian. I think it's helpful. Anything else for Brian and the CAC liaisons to take back?
Just a question, right? So part of the premise, and thank you, Brian, for what you've done. Appreciate the effort that's been put into it. The premise being that by reducing the funding to the named corridor projects, there's more money that can be put into transit. How does that additional money that goes into transit equate to what the city has outlined in their recent holistic prioritization? So I believe at the CAC meeting, or maybe it was this last meeting here, Sam indicated that the dollar amounts and the services for transit on the city's prioritized list are within the city, although the transit system and the funding that goes into the transit system is regional. So how does taking money out of the named corridor projects and putting it into transit, that additional 180 million, get dispersed across the region, and how many of the city's top priority items on here get addressed?
So that question came up at the last working group discussion at the request of a couple of members. We did provide a memo in the packet to respond to that. Basically, what was proposed there consumes roughly 87% of all the transit elements.
The transit element being what amount? 510 million.
Yes, for the services, yes.
So this represents 87%. Does that necessitate cuts to the other regional transit services?
That would only leave 13% for all the other services, yes.
And what is the current allocation to those other regional services?
45%.
So just so that, that is part of the discussion. This proposal doesn't fully fund the city's top listed priorities, unless then there's cut to other regional. I would hope that we're starting from the standpoint, just like the city's premise and their number one and number two priorities, right, are continuation of existing services, that we wouldn't be cutting regional services.
I believe the proposal goes beyond existing services. It's enhancements, but it's 87% of what's allocated. So the remaining 13% would be for the rest of the region.
So it would help, and I'm sorry, I didn't read the memorandum prior to this morning, but it would help to be able to see of a transit allocation of 690. How does that get applied to all the existing services, and then what is left for expansion?
We can have that discussion. Again, we're not that level of discussion with the CAC on the allocations. But if that's the direction they want to go, we can have that additional discussion, because they haven't even broken down how much money goes for what sub element.
And to the point, and I appreciate the feedback from especially Oro Valley, Sarita, Marana, but really when you look at the cuts to roadway projects, they were cuts to the city of Tucson. It didn't cut any other jurisdiction, and the intent was to move that money towards transit because that's what was important to the city of Tucson. So I personally would advocate, not speaking on behalf of the CAC, but I personally would advocate that that increase in transit funding really be applied to the city of Tucson services, because the intent behind what I went to was essentially cutting their roadway projects to find money for transit. So if that meant that the proportions changed or whatever, then that's what I would like to hear, right? Because there are certain areas, you know, I'll look at you just because you're directly across from me, but for Sarita, right, those projects, those named projects I've heard are very important to the town, and are more important than perhaps more funding for transit, where not that roadway projects aren't important to the city of Tucson, but transit is very important to them right now. So this is really trying to balance the different needs of different jurisdictions, but not stealing from one to give to another was not the intent behind this, at least from my personal opinion.
Thank you, Tom.
Yeah, there's another iteration, I guess, that we should probably go through. Farhad showed what his memo indicates the 55-45 split of the proposed $510 allocation. So at 55-45, if you look at what the CAC has been deliberating about at 691, switches you to about 60-40. And that reflects really, as much as anything, an effort by CAC members who brought forward that proposal that we've discussed forever, for a number of months now. An increase in the overall allocation within RTA Next for transit of 30%. As if you look at RTA 1, it's about 24, 25. So that obviously, if you talk about almost or a little bit more total money and you add 5% more on top to transit, and then you add another couple percent for the other categoricals, there's only one place really where it can come from, and that's from these corridor projects. And in fact, it would have to go deeper than what Brian's got, as I was pointing out before.
So hopefully,
But that's on the table as far as the CAC is concerned, and your feedback is really important in order for them to have the full packs, I guess, of that kind of a plan.
hopefully, Tom and the officers, we've been discussing this. So I'm trying to focus on what's fiscally constrained, and the other proposal was not. It's $240 million over. That's why we're only focusing on what's fiscally constrained. So as soon as we solve the $240 million puzzle, then we'll get there.
I think the fundamental. So first of all, thank you for doing what you did. It was a lot of work. I appreciate it. I think the fundamental difference, though, is so yes, you reduced the amount of the city road projects with an expectation of $8. Got that? I'm clear on that. The challenge, I think, is that the total for the roadway projects is intact. 1.12 billion, which is what we started with.
Yep.
So all that happened was that of that you distributed based on the time, or that was shrunk for the city of Tucson with the expectation areas would get more until we change the allocation of those categoricals. That's not going to happen. That's the fundamental piece, right? So we're living within this framework and trying to shoehorn ourselves here. But the dollars can't have both.
Right.
Right. I understand exactly how you did all you suggested. You just outlined is exactly the issue, right? But that 1.2 is still intact, which means the categoricals are. So I'd also like to call Sam up. I think I want to make sure we're clear on some of the transit conversations. So Sam, if you don't mind, maybe.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. So I heard the conversation about the transit projects in our draft prioritized project list, and I was able to get some clarification from our staff. I know I did say last time at this last meeting that those projects only represent transit service within the city limits. I actually got some clarification from our team. What we did is we actually took the projects 44, 45, 46, and 47 and took the IGA totals and extended them out 20 years. And within those IGAs, it actually does include transit outside of the city limits. So those top 4 projects total about $229 million is transit service, both inside and outside of the city limits. And we can certainly share the details of those IGAs with you all. I was looking back at the 2006 RTA plan, and there was about $534 million in that plan, including the Sunlink streetcar, as well as park and ride transit centers, and then all of those projects that I just mentioned, as well as neighborhood circulator bus systems, which is primarily, I think that's run by the RTA, and express service expansion. And so when you look at that, the city of Tucson provides most of that service. And looking at our plan that we presented in our prioritized project list, we have about $443 million, including expanded service beyond the existing transit service. That leaves $67 million from that $510 million. Again, you go back and look at the original RTA plan, neighborhood circulator bus systems is only at $25 million. So I still think there's room there to make sure that there's an opportunity for transit outside of the city limits that the city does not service, which is primarily the neighborhood circulators. We do service the express routes. That wasn't included in our prioritized project list, mainly because that represents a very small amount of ridership. We do understand that there is a desire for that service. And so obviously there's a conversation now about prioritization of transit service across the region. So I just wanted to provide that clarity because I think I spoke incorrectly last time. And again, those top 4 projects are inclusive of all the service we provide both in and outside of the city in our current IGAs with the RTA. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam.
Go ahead, Tom.
The question that we had asked a couple of meetings before was given the priority for some 250 million or so of transit, those first 5 priorities. What percentage of the overall regional need is that? In other words, if you took those and all the RTA transit service and boosted that up for those things that are not part of the city's analysis here, what would that total be? And I think we've kind of gotten close to it, but I'm not sure if you've been able to gather all the regional people together. We got some information from Rio and at PAG, but still not sure we've got the answer maybe to that question.
Yeah, and Tom, I remember having that conversation with you. I think that's where we're going to need the RTA's help to provide the cost to provide that transit service outside the city limits. We can only give you what we have in terms of the IGAs with the RTA. I mean, currently the fiscal year 23 IGAs total about 12.8 million for 1 year. So, I mean, you can, multiply that out by 20 years to get a rough cost, but that doesn't include how much the RTA spends on Sun Shuttle and Sun Shuttle Dial-A-Ride. They'll have to provide those dollars.
Just for everyone's benefit, the reason we wanted to look at that is because we're looking at a regional allocation. And the question keeps coming up, what are we getting for $691 billion for the CAC proposal? And understanding that the city's request is in the $425 million range. What about that other 250 million above that? Is that justified from the point of view of the other non-city services, non-city transit services? And presuming that it's not, I'm sure that it's not, or I'm sure, it doesn't mean it's true, but and then we add the high capacity transit to that. What number are we going to end up at? And otherwise, we're simply saying we want to we want to enhance transit, but not saying exactly how or where those areas would necessarily be. Farhad mentioned that we had not come up with the sub-elements in transit. We have done that. We've discussed them all, and we have numbers there. We haven't acted on those, but just like we've not acted officially on the remainder of our project, remainder of our draft plan.
I mean, just to reiterate, so we've heard from jurisdictions that the neighborhood circulators are important. So there are those kind of things that would need to be added. And as far as Tom's issue, I mean, a lot of the number comes from, just like anything else, it's a proportion of the total transit needs from the long range transit plan that belongs plenty of as well. So yes, it's enhanced to the level that we can want to. But I don't want to lose sight of what we talked about before, which is the categoricals, because Brian did a really good job of taking the city's top priority and then all the other jurisdictions' top priority, which is transit. That's budgeted in the transit budget, but not only was the city's top priority transit and their bottom priority were the corridors, but they had other categories between. That's what we haven't done yet. So yes, the categoricals are still, we always talk a lot about safety and bike ped, and like Carmine said, there was a group came in from Green Valley with pretty specific wants down in Green Valley. I mean, they probably don't add up to a lot, but we talked about putting at least a couple of the, high, I don't know, the focus, the high spotlighted categorical projects in each categories. So people in those areas get a bit of an idea about, yes, the needs that they've brought up constantly or, whatever, are making it in. So it's not just a number. I mean, those are the things we haven't really talked about yet, other than the city that moved a couple of projects in the city to active transportation. But safety and active transportation is the city's second top priority. So we're still trying to figure out how to work all that out into
All right, yes, go.
All right, I think to that point, county goes back and reviews our stuff and potentially identifies some of these non-corridor projects. We would be asking to tuck those under the various or the appropriate categorical heading. And from that standpoint, I think that the city has already suggested a couple. They've got a list of other safety element projects on here. I think all the jurisdictions need to take a look then at whether there are specific projects that would fall under those category elements so that we don't have, here's the name roadway corridor projects, we've got transit, we have the other categories of safety and active transportation that have projects of some jurisdictions, but not all jurisdictions, right? In fairness, if we're gonna do that, we should be conscious about it and ask jurisdictions if they have safety improvement projects that need to be named as safety elements in active transportation. When we come back with, some input on the proposal from the Green Valley bicycle community, we're gonna be saying, here's projects and we're gonna.
Carmen, I think that's exactly what we tried to do with our list, was show a holistic investment. The RTA region. For me, it was community. And so when you look at all aspects of that investment, includes transit and safety and other things, right? The reason, quite frankly, that here I listed safety elements and paving rehabilitation components, the streets, the actual roads that we're going to be under those, what we're proposing this category, so that we could demonstrate the investment citywide. Because if you just look at if Marianne Cleveland Way falls off, there's nothing on in the east side of Tucson. That's a disaster. But if I can demonstrate the other investments using some of the other dollars of the categories, then I can at least point to it and say, hey, we've got some safety improvements, we've got some other, the needs are different. Just like the needs are different in all of the jurisdictions. The needs are different than Tucson boards.
The same logic applies to Green Valley.
Exactly.
One of the reasons that we've really reached out to Green Valley and said, we don't have these corridor projects, but the things you need down there that you claim are the most important to you are potential categorical projects. So let's talk about that. That's what Carmen is doing.
And Tom, that's exactly what we should be doing across the board. And that's what I tried to do. We tried to do, which was basically to demonstrate whether this is the ballot language or not. That's a whole different conversation. But for this conversation, so that we can then go out and say, I'm investing there, I'm investing here, I'm investing here. It might be a different investment. And it could and probably should be based on the need. Again, Green Valley is different than even northern.
Change.
Did you have your hand up? Did you want to make a comment, Carol?
You go ahead.
I saw it. So.
Give it around, but Farhad keeps pointing out to us that then we got to have a balance here, because that reduces the flexibility of the other categoricals. We wouldn't want to fill them all up. As somebody that sat on the RTA1 working group, one of the working groups, everybody's going to be competing for those categoricals for the next 20 years. So, we're not suggesting that all of the categories are full, but that there are some flagship projects that we know about and can show to the voters that,
And my comment was along the same lines. I haven't been around in terms of seeing and learning from the past. Those of you who have certainly have added value here in these conversations. But what I have heard and my takeaways is that it's largely in the categoricals that gives us flexibility as a region over that 20-year period to react to development needs and the changing needs, quite frankly, of the region. And so there's a danger in tying up all of our categorical monies with named projects. However, there's a balancing act with the voter as well, because we know that the voter is more inclined to check the box if they're seeing named projects that resonate well with them, instead of this nebulous pot of money for us to react. There's just a lack of trust in government in general. So it is a balancing act to that extent. So I know that the town of Sarita is going to be able to, identify project worthy categorical, categorical worthy projects. It's just a question mark is the timing of doing that and whether it's now or it's as we go along over the next 20 years. Thanks.
Thank you for that. And Carolyn touched on it. So the way we addressed that last time back in 2005-06 was to have the educational materials and the administrative code, to have a list of potential projects and eligibility. And that was the information that was provided to the voters at the time to demonstrate that here are the type of projects that would be eligible. And again, you were all involved with that. So that's separate from what's on the ballot. On the ballot, it was just eligibility.
And I do want to point out that there was also a fellow from Sarita that came in, and there are projects that are listed in that, what we could call the Green Valley PAG, which is also got some Sarita. So hopefully you guys will all see that.
Thank you.
All right. Any other questions, comments, suggestions? If not, we're looking forward to taking some of this information back to the CAC and continue the conversation.
Can we just articulate the takeaway from this conversation and what next steps are with the CAC? I mean, I would benefit from that.
I'm going to ask the CAC representatives to maybe tell us what they think the takeaway is. Would that be helpful? Because you're going to have to communicate that to your members.
Mr. Chair. Yeah. I'm not sure.
Yeah, that's why I asked the question.
Right. That's why when you said we should say what it is, I nodded my head. Yes, I
Well,
should.
Good.
Just a couple of the things that we talked about and that, we're going to continue doing in account. It might be helpful overall. We're going to go and look at scopes of the main corridor projects. We're going to look at prioritization. We're going to come in and, give some feedback on any changes to that we might be proposing. So, those steps we will take and probably be beneficial just to get confirmation back to the CAC from the jurisdiction saying what you're working with, right, in terms of prioritization scope is actually. And then we're going to be looking at identifying based on those gaps geographically where we see opportunities to introduce non-corridor projects and identify them with the appropriate category that they would fall into. And whether that's active transportation or safety, we'll know what that is and get that information back to the CAC. So we will work to do that prior to or be available to speak to the CAC with some materials and explain what it is we did and what we came up with and how we arrived there. So that's what we're going to be focusing on. And hopefully you can springboard off that if something more is important.
Yeah, and obviously I've taken notes about where everybody is working right now. And it'll be important for us, obviously, to have those answers, or at least that further detailed input when we meet. But as far as our process goes, there are still a lot of moving parts, I guess, but understanding where to draw the line, and as I've been telling you all along, where the second line would be drawn should the CAC continue to push for higher transit and lower corridor projects is going to be kind of contingent on a lot of that feedback. Where the line is drawn depends on if any of them are any of the projects are withdrawn and put into categorical, or if scoping for Colossal Cave results in a reduction in that $157 million price tag. Whether Drexel Road should indeed, I think it should be moved up above the line in order to complete that corridor. A number of these issues, I think, are important for us to really have our have some finality to in order to make a proposal.
So, Tom and other CAC reps here, how did Brian's exercise, how, in your opinion, how was it resonating with the rest of the CAC? I mean, is it moving in the right direction from a CAC's perspective in terms of we've got these different options? It seems like all the options, option one was kind of a foundation, and then every option after that was kind of building off of that foundation in terms of representing the region's priorities, jurisdictional priorities. Tucson's priority is more on transit than it is on the categoricals. Everything's important. We understand the exercise, but it's been a clear message that transit is more important to Tucson. Name projects for us, our two projects are really important as a jurisdiction. So as you keep building that process, is this heading in the right direction for the CAC in terms of finding additional money to move into transit? Can you respond to that? I'm just trying to figure out, if you guys took a vote on this, are we moving in the right direction?
Well, I think absolutely. I think the direction, though, may be a little different than either side, either side of the transit roadway divide may think. The point I'm trying to make is that these are the foundational elements for us to achieve a compromise plan. We have to understand what the full ramifications of each end of the spectrum are in order to see that to get census, some will have to probably give in each direction. That's my takeaway. Carolyn mentioned before that we have looked at these priorities, but that we haven't delved down into kind of switching 6 and 5 as Brian did in option 4, and understanding, the Drexel fell below and needs to come up, or it doesn't, and then really how many projects are lost as a result of drawing a second black line, $980 million. What is that? What is the impact? Both sides need to understand it, because the transit folks may say it's okay, and the roadway people may say that's terrible. That'll kill the whole proposal. And like I say, it's at that point where you actually say, all right, well, how much would it take to not kill it in both directions?
Well,
And
just my feedback on this is that, as I think back on the conversation that the working group had and the TMC had on the original plan that was voted on and approved, and we have still at play today, that there was always a thought that that represented a prioritization exercise, and that if we needed to find more money, we would start moving up, and the lowest priority for the region was the modernization projects, and those happened to be, if we needed to find more money for transit or categoricals or our cost overruns because of inflation on the projects, we would start moving up, and we wouldn't be able to fund priority number 7 and priority number 6. We'd have to move that line up. Well, exercise that CAC just put forward, which is is kind of, in my opinion, is kind of working off that same type of thinking. And so my feedback to the CAC is that I think, I can work in this exercise because it's building off of all the work that we've done as a region to this point. So in my mind, this is kind of a good course in terms of getting us to a finish line where we have a joint plan that we're presenting to the board come December.
Frank.
So with all due respect,
I understand.
think that the approved plan is great with everybody because you took all the city of Tucson projects off the list. If you remember, our priorities because of the modernization projects were at the very bottom of what everybody voted. So I think it was you and John Bernal said, well, let's just start looking simplistically at where that line is exactly which chopped basically all of this. Not all. They were all city Tucson projects, but bunch. So I want to thank you for that because that actually got me thinking about how to approach it, which really prompted this list, if you will, and the approach of prioritization on a macro scale in terms of investment. And so, in my opinion, the linear process that we have followed was flawed in that it did not show or demonstrate the investment in the region, all those other categories. And
Are you talking about
again,
categorical?
categoricals. And so because it doesn't do that, it's a tall order for me to go back to my folks and say, don't worry about it. We're going to make it up in volume down the road. It's not going to happen. I'm telling you. And to say that we need flexibility is great. I'm absolutely in agreement. But for the confidence from the voter that that flexibility will in fact address the needs in a way that will show investment across the region. And that is what challenges. So what I tried to do when I list those as examples, not necessarily to be included in the ballot, but to list those to demonstrate so I could go to my folks and say, look at the investment across the entirety of the community. It's that simple. And so, yeah, it's great. And it's voted on. I disagree and my priorities stand. But you need to recognize that, you know, the linear approach, in my opinion, is not going to get us across the finish line. It's got to be looked at in the context of the categoricals and how we're investing across the board. It's just that simple. I mean, I'm not trying to oversimplify it, but from where I sit, if we cannot demonstrate the investment, including Greenbelt, including Colossal Cave, including all these other pieces, right, I think we're in trouble. And so, you know, again, I thank you for bringing that up because I wanted to make sure that I gave you credit for helping bring it, at least in my head, to how the prioritization works. Because I was so focused on the prioritization of the road or the named projects that I couldn't explain what the rest of this investment was. I think that's been the struggle of the CIC because that's been some of the conversations I've heard from their discussion as to how does all that work. And again, not to suggest that flexibility is not important. I think it is. And even in our own list, we said that list is only half of the dollars that we've got allocated for those safety. It's just an example, leaving flexibility for changing development and all things.
No, so I hear that and I try to internalize it in that in order for us to all to get there, then we need to start naming projects that would tap the categoricals. And it doesn't mean that at the end of the day, what we recommend to the board has 100% of the categorical funding tied up in named projects. But I'm just trying to make sure I understand.
And I didn't do that. So if you look at the way that I approached it in our proposal, it was not used 100%. And I even said that these are types of projects, types of investment. The term investment for me is really important. So I can show and demonstrate what the return on investment is for the voter. I have to be able to show that. If you don't, I'm good with that. But I have to be able to show how the investment in RTA Next across the entirety of the city will be accomplished, at least in some framework. You know, these types of projects, HAWKs, these types of safety improvements, intersection improvements. Then I can say to my councilors on the east side, don't worry about that project because we're improving all of these intersections, which are huge safety concerns or they're huge operational concerns. At least then I can in good conscience say to them, we've got a good investment from RTA Next that's coming to this area, and hence you then can go out and sell it to the voters.
So anyhow, as I mentioned, go ahead, Jeff, and then I'll piggyback on that.
I was gonna say, I mean, obviously we tried to look at projects region-wide, but you start to look at community-wide, just each community-wide, it's hard, you know, so you're right. I've said it before, our two projects are on the edge of town. They're, you know, so I've said, you know, how do I then show that we have town-wide investment too? So that's difficult. So I'm not sure, it's a hard, I guess, charge for all of us to say, yep, every neighborhood of our town got something. But we do have, I mean, I will say we put a lot of effort on these named projects. We know generally how much, these are definitely well-traveled roads and such. But one aspect I think it would help me from the CAC is, you know, we say transit. We're basically saying transit's one project, but it's not. There's a lot of routes. There's a lot to transit. And I don't think there's been the level of really look at that, which routes are traveled well or have capacity to travel well and have good ridership. Again, whether they're growing or they're not. Some concepts, you asked about the next steps. What routes do we possibly consider that they might not continue or they're going to be rerouted somehow? So I think transit has to have a little more oomph behind it, a little more analysis behind it, and not just transit, because I think the sell of transit has to have some comfort behind it too. So I think that would be helpful and I'm talking about the voter as a whole.
Thank you. That demonstrates that there's another part into this whole implementation. And that's what I want to go back to what Shane was just saying as well. The implementation follows what's on the ballot is a little bit different. Obviously, we're not going to be able to identify every single project, every single route over the next 20 years. So I just want to make sure everybody recognizes that the exercise we're working on right now is what goes on the ballot. Implementation, we will continue to work on that. We will continue to educate even the voters on how it's going to be implemented. That's yet to come. Carol.
I just want to respond, and because I think I understand what the city did with number 6 here, because Suntran went through the comprehensive operational analysis and they did that route by route, and they had, you know, kind of the same issue that we've been dealing in terms of corridor projects, was that they had an initial draft. Everybody said they wanted, you know, they wanted more frequency, and so then they recommended cutting particular routes because they weren't necessarily performing well. They might have been performing well, but they were close enough to walk for most people to a different route. And then the people who lived on those routes came like out, you know. But I wanted to ask Sam if he could explain number 6 on your transit priority, because I think, or you know, or what does that mean? Does it mean you're addressing keeping the routes that we're going to get cut and the frequency as the COA outlined? Is that what this means?
Yeah, great question, Carolyn. So we did use the recommendations from the COA as a basis for that. And so it doesn't cover all of the service that was requested through the COA, but it does start to address those needs. And that is primarily in the span of service as well as frequency. I mean, those were the two things that we heard. And so some of the recommendations in the system that we were going to make with the trade-offs that you just discussed, we're not going to be able to make under the COA. And so we're taking that into account in this item. This number actually could be a lot larger. This is we call it our tier 1 expansion of service. We could go well beyond that, but that was just what fit into the overall budgeting exercise.
Thank you. Yeah,
Thank you.
but that, it was a really good point. And after our 626 discussion, a small group went back and looked at not particular routes, because we haven't really had a big discussion about those in this city, but have particular categories of frequency and weekend service and weeknight service. So we have all that in a proposal as well that we're talking about.
And I think Carolyn, Tom, is as the conversation continues around transit, a crosswalk is going to be really helpful to show, here's the 690, this much of it covers existing services, this much of it is available for expansion services, and not down to the specificity of what's exactly expanding. But I'd like to also see then, how does it relate to what the city's lined up to? I just want to make sure that we don't walk out of this going, okay, the 690 covers the city's priorities, and then we're finding cuts in service to other existing regional transit users. I want to be able to put eyes on that so that we all have extreme comfort in what is funded with the 690.
So I must say this again, the 690 assumes a $240 million fiscally unconstrained plan.
No, but
So that goes back to what Brian was trying to do. How do you balance?
No, I'm assuming, right, that we heard a lot of discussion. Keep going on this, right? I think that absolutely.
Yeah.
Mike's point, right? We've got to look at this in its entirety. We're down the stretch here. And so I don't think we can afford to talk about one element without the other. It has to be, right, some form of one of these options, getting road corridor projects identified at a dollar threshold that provides then the funding to make those adjustments in the non-roadway category so that it's fiscally constrained.
Yeah, I follow what you're saying. All I'm saying is that I think Brian's exercise is trying to define what that number is. We don't have a number yet. He's providing options to demonstrate how do you balance between the two. Is that a correct way to describe your exercise?
Speaking personally, I feel extreme pressure because we are in the final stretch of this, and there has been so much time spent at the CAC really battling between roadways and transit, but those two different elements. And again, it comes down to, and I think that's good because that we are the citizen, but that is representative of the community. There to some transit is critical and it needs to be expanded and it needs to be supported to a different level, where to others it's no, I have my car and I hate sitting at this intersection and I want you to fix it, to go as simple as possible. So it's trying to find that balance and then do this in a way that doesn't offend any or hopefully all jurisdictions. So yes, I almost regret going through the exercise now with my C- brain, but the goal was just to try to find that line and to try to find that compromise, because the categoricals, we have not spent the time talking in them that I think we should, that we need to, and I don't know that we're going to get there until we stop spending an hour bickering over one project over another. Like that was my goal, is put these roadway projects to bed so that we can go in and focus on those other categoricals and how some of this can fix. You know, that Colossal Cave project, we have spent more time talking about that one project alone than anything else. We should have just come to an agreement that hell or high water, we will fund that, just so we could have moved on and had more time. So it was an imperfect exercise. It certainly does not encompass everything that is on here, and I know that. It was just meant to be a starting point and try to balance this thing out.
I want to just, as a proud owner of C- grades all the way through college, you did a great job. So don't take this as a negative reflection on what you did or the energy and effort that you put forth. I also want to point out that Colossal Cave Road is in, I mean, not big, I think it's a little tiny stretch in the city, maybe small. But I'm gonna disagree with Farhad in that he suggested early on, or just a minute ago, that we are focused on the ballot language. I think that's a mistake to only look at ballot language without looking at what makes up that language. Because if we use what I'll call squishy language to give us flexibility, back to Shane's point, and not have a conversation around that, it's going to make it very difficult for folks to go out and understand what it is the investment looks like across the board. It's just like, well, trust us because we're good folks and we're going to make it happen. That makes me nervous. Last thing I'll leave you with, Jeff, is if this were easy, we wouldn't be sitting here. This is hard, and it's hard across the board, right? I think that the approach is from where I sit, simple. What's the investment? What's the return on investment for the entirety of those that are going to vote? Part of the region. And I think that roadmap that we put forth gives you an indication of where ours are. And you can dissect that however you'd like. And I told the mayor and council, those priorities, don't worry about 1 through 20, right? Worry about 20 through 26. That needs to be your focus, because if that line moves up, going back to the 980, if that line moves up, those are on the bubble. And that, for me, that's a conversation. So I think if we looked at it regionally, similarly, I think all of a sudden that conversation becomes a lot simpler. My opinion.
I could though, back to the trend, just as far as the marketing, talking about language, the transit, when we start talking about percentages and we just say transit versus roads, something that compels the public, countywide of transit, when they're getting more transit, when they don't use transit. So I mean, I think that's what we need is, getting back to the investment part. Where is it being invested? How's the ridership? Where are the routes? We got to paint a picture, I think, for the public on transit, not just say transit. We need transit. So hopefully that'll it's okay with some of the other group. I've not been part of the CAC meetings, but we got to compel others that may not agree with us that this is worthwhile.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? And hopefully, Shane, your question was answered, that we hope that they can convey the takeaway from today's discussion, and we'll do our best to do the same. Any other questions or comments before we adjourn?
The question for Tom and Carolyn, if it's a value, we can there to help, be there to explain the conversation. Every CAC, I know Sam was there last.
Yeah, Sam's been fantastic. He's been at each of the last 3 meetings at least, and
We will continue. He's happy to be there.
we've also had access to those. Yeah, that was the royal we.
Yeah.
We've also had access to the transit working group, folks from Suntran and other related and RTA support. The RTA support has been excellent as far as being able to learn more about these the nuances, if you will. We learned about that COA, the comprehensive analysis, which gets to some of Jeff's questions about routes coming out. It's really helpful. Any of the other TMC members who, and Carmine is there for every meeting, as well as Terry Rosema. So, we're getting lots of great support from this group, and any and all of you are more than welcome to come and participate in those meetings.
Okay, thank you all. If there are no other questions or comments, I don't see any movement, then we are adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I was gonna say,